Detective Andrew Perez had spent over a decade serving the New York Police Department, NYPD, with unwavering dedication. Known for his sharp instincts and incorruptible nature, he was a man who believed in justice above all else. But in a matter of days, everything he had built came crashing down. Andrew wasn't just a great detective. He was a devoted father. His 7-year-old daughter, Emily Perez, was his entire world. Since losing his wife in a tragic accident, he had done everything in his power to create a safe and loving home for her. And at the heart of that home was Gunner, a highly trained K-9 unit dog who had once been Andrew's trusted partner in the force. But to Emily, Gunner was more than a police dog. He was her best friend, her protector, her guardian. Every night, Emily would fall asleep curled up next to Gunner, believing that as long as he was there, nothing could hurt her. Then came the worst day of Andrew's life. A key witness in a high-profile corruption case had been found dead, and all evidence pointed to Andrew. His fingerprints were at the scene. His service weapon was identified as the murder weapon. Witnesses placed him near the crime scene. But there was one problem. He wasn't there. Andrew fought back, swearing his innocence, but the system he once trusted turned against him. His fellow officers avoided him. His superiors refused to hear his side of the story. The media labeled him a cold-blooded criminal. The case moved fast, almost as if someone powerful was pulling the strings, ensuring he had no chance to defend himself. At the trial, the verdict was swift: life in prison without parole. The courtroom was filled with murmurs and gasps. But Andrew didn't react. He had prepared for this betrayal. But what he hadn't prepared for was the moment he saw Emily's tear-streaked face, clutching her tattered stuffed rabbit from across the room. When the judge asked if he had any final requests before his transfer, Andrew only had one. "Let me hug my daughter one last time." They allowed him 3 minutes. As he knelt down to hold her, Emily trembled in his arms, her little fingers digging into his jumpsuit. Then she whispered something in his ear that stopped his heart cold. "Daddy, if you go away, he's going to hurt me too." The walls of New York State Penitentiary felt like they were closing in on Andrew Perez. Every second spent in his cold, concrete cell was a second too long. Emily was in danger, and he was locked away, helpless. His daughter's whispered words still echoed in his mind, each syllable fueling his rage, fear, and desperation. "Daddy, if you go away, he's going to hurt me too." He had to get out. Now. But escaping a maximum security prison wasn't just difficult, it was suicide. The facility was built to house the most dangerous criminals in the state. It was monitored 24/7, surrounded by watchtowers, motion detectors, and steel-reinforced fences. But Andrew wasn't just any prisoner. He was a highly trained detective, someone who had spent years studying criminal minds, security weaknesses, and tactical operations. He just needed a plan. Outside those prison walls, Ethan Miller was already working against the clock. Ethan had known Andrew for years. They had been partners on the force, had saved each other's lives more times than they could count. And despite the evidence stacked against Andrew, Ethan never once believed he was guilty. Now, as he sat in his dimly lit apartment, sifting through piles of case files and surveillance footage, Ethan's gut told him something wasn't right. The case had moved too fast, the evidence had been too perfect, and the key witness, Emma Williams, had vanished without a trace. Then there was Gunner. The former K-9 police dog had been Andrew's partner in the field before being forced into retirement after Andrew's conviction. But to Ethan's surprise, Gunner hadn't adjusted to his new shelter. The trainers reported that he refused to obey anyone, refused to eat, refused to engage in any training exercises. The only thing he did was stare at the gates, as if waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Ethan wasn't sure if dogs could sense injustice, but he knew one thing: Gunner wasn't giving up on Andrew, and neither was he. For weeks, Ethan pulled every string he had left, using his suspension as a cover to dig deeper into the case. When he finally found what he needed, it was worse than he had imagined. The murder Andrew had been framed for, it wasn't just a cover-up. It was an execution ordered by Brian Greene, a powerful and ruthless businessman who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes for years. And the one person standing in his way? Andrew. Ethan had to get him out. But there was only one way to break a cop out of a maximum security prison: create a distraction so big that no one would see it coming. And so he did what no sane person would do. He hired the most dangerous inmates inside that prison to start a riot. The moment it began, chaos exploded through the cell blocks. Inmates fought with everything they had, setting fires, attacking guards, and taking control of multiple sections. The alarm blared, red emergency lights flashing against the steel bars as guards scrambled to regain control. Andrew, still in his cell, knew this was his chance. A split second later, his cell door swung open. A guard, either bribed or coerced, had left it unlocked. Andrew didn't question it. He ran. Outside the prison gates, in the middle of a forest clearing, Gunnar lifted his head. His ears twitched, his nose flaring as he caught something on the wind. A scent, familiar, his human. Gunnar's muscles tensed, his instincts sharpening. Next to him, Ethan tightened his grip on his radio. The riot was getting worse, and the window for Andrew's escape was closing fast. "Come on, buddy," Ethan murmured. "Find him." Gunnar didn't hesitate. With lightning-fast reflexes, he took off toward the prison's underground drainage system, one of the few weak spots in the facility's security. Meanwhile, inside the prison, Andrew had just reached the maintenance tunnels. He was bleeding, a deep cut across his forehead from an earlier fight, but he didn't slow down. Every step he took echoed through the damp, abandoned tunnels, and behind him he could hear the distant shouts of pursuing guards. Then suddenly, he wasn't alone. A rustling sound. A shadow moved ahead of him. Andrew braced himself, preparing for a fight, until a familiar shape emerged from the darkness. Gunnar. For a second, neither moved. Then, without hesitation, Gunnar bounded forward, pressing his head against Andrew's chest with a low, relieved whimper. Andrew knelt, gripping the fur at Gunnar's neck, his breath uneven. "I missed you too, buddy." But there was no time to waste. Gunnar turned, leading Andrew through the tunnels, past old rusted grates and into the thick brush of the forest. They had barely made it into the cover of trees when gunshots rang out. The guards had found them. Andrew ran like hell, Gunnar right by his side. Bullets whizzed past them, kicking up dirt and leaves as flashlights flickered wildly in the darkness. Ethan was waiting a mile ahead, but between them and freedom was a heavily armed search team closing in fast. Then up ahead, a frozen river. Andrew skidded to a stop, heart pounding. The river was partially frozen but unstable. Running across was a gamble. Behind him, the guards were closing in. And then Gunnar made the choice for him. With a powerful leap, the dog launched himself onto the ice, sliding across with practiced agility. His paws barely made a sound. He turned back, barking, urging Andrew to follow. Andrew inhaled sharply. Then he ran onto the ice. The guards reached the riverbank just in time to see Andrew disappear into the darkness on the other side. They tried to follow, but the ice didn't hold. With a deafening crack, the frozen surface gave way beneath their weight, sending them crashing into the freezing water. Andrew didn't look back. He ran. Minutes later, a pair of headlights cut through the trees. Ethan. Andrew stumbled into the passenger seat, Gunnar jumping in behind him. "Drive," Andrew gasped. "Now." Ethan didn't hesitate. The car tore through the forest, speeding away from the sirens fading in the distance. For the first time in months, Andrew was free. But his fight was far from over. Emily was still out there. And now, it was time to bring her home. The city of New York stretched before them, neon lights flickering against the damp streets as Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. They had escaped, but they weren't safe yet. Andrew Perez sat in the passenger seat, his breath heavy, a mix of exhaustion and adrenaline coursing through his veins. Blood from a gash above his eyebrow trickled down his temple, but he didn't care. Not about the pain, not about the bullet wound grazing his arm. There was only one thought consuming his mind: Emily. She was out there, alone, afraid, and in danger. And now he finally knew who had taken her. "We need to find Brian Green," Andrew said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Ethan nodded grimly. "And we need to do it fast." Gunnar let out a low, guttural growl from the back seat, his ears pinned back, sensing the tension in the air. The former K9 unit dog had never failed Andrew before, and he wouldn't now. His eyes burned with an unspoken determination, as if he understood that his family was incomplete without Emily. But tracking down one of the most powerful men in New York, the puppet master behind Andrew's downfall, would be no easy task. Brian Green wasn't just rich. He was dangerous, a man with layers of protection, a network of criminals, and an army of dirty cops at his disposal. And if Andrew wanted to take him down, he had to move in the shadows, just like the people who had framed him. Their first lead came from an unexpected source: Emma Williams, the missing witness who had vanished the night of the murder. Ethan had spent weeks trying to track her down, and now, with the pieces falling into place, they had no choice but to find her first. If anyone had seen what really happened that night, it was her. But there was one problem. Emma was terrified. When Ethan finally reached her, hidden away in a run-down motel outside the city, she nearly slammed the door in his face. "I don't know anything," she hissed, voice shaking. "I can't help you." But then Gunnar moved forward, his deep brown eyes locking onto hers. There was something about the dog's presence, something steady, unwavering, comforting. He wasn't just a police dog, he was a protector, and in that moment, Emma saw what she had been running from. Not just the fear, the guilt. "I saw it," she whispered finally, her voice barely above a breath. "The night Darius Kemp had an unfortunate event, it wasn't Andrew, it was two men, two cops." Andrew's fists clenched. "John Baker," Ethan said, his voice laced with disgust. Emma nodded, her hands trembling. "He wasn't alone. There was someone else, someone higher up. And now—" She swallowed, glancing at the burner phone on the table. "They're coming for me, too." Andrew exhaled slowly, his mind racing. If John Baker was just a pawn, then the real mastermind, the one pulling the strings, was Brian Green. But how did they get to him? And more importantly, where was Emily? The answer came faster than expected. As Ethan and Andrew were leaving the motel, Ethan's phone buzzed, an unknown number. The second he answered, a distorted voice slithered through the line. "You should have stayed in prison, Calloway." Andrew ran cold. "Where is my daughter?" His voice was controlled, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the dashboard. A chuckle. Slow. Mocking. "You want her back?" The voice taunted. "Then stop. Stop running. Stop fighting. Stop digging where you don't belong." There was a brief pause, and then faintly in the background, the soft, muffled cry of a little girl. Emily. "Daddy!" The call cut off. Silence. Andrew barely had time to react before Gunnar let out a sharp, piercing bark, his entire body stiffening. The scent. Emily's scent. It was faint, but it was there, lingering on the crumpled piece of fabric left near the motel's door. A warning. A message. Andrew grabbed it, his pulse hammering. "She was here," he breathed. "They brought her here." With Gunnar leading the way, they tracked the scent trail through alleyways, abandoned streets, and industrial buildings on the outskirts of the city. Every second counted. The night was still, the air thick with the scent of rain and asphalt as Andrew Perez adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. His heart pounded like a war drum, each beat hammering the same thought into his mind. This was it. For months he had been hunted, framed, and cast aside. But tonight the tables had turned. Brian Greene, the man behind his downfall, was waiting for him at his heavily fortified estate. He thought Andrew wouldn't make it this far. He thought he had already won. But he was wrong. And now, Andrew was coming for him. Beside him, Ethan Miller checked his weapon, his expression tense but focused. "We'd do this fast," Ethan muttered. In and out. In the back seat, Gunnar sat poised and alert, ears perked, muscles coiled with anticipation. He had been with Andrew through everything, never wavering, never questioning. A protector, a fighter, a friend. And now he was ready for one last battle. The estate was a fortress, a sprawling mansion perched on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high fences, security cameras, and patrolling guards. But no security system was perfect. Andrew and Ethan had studied the layout for hours, pinpointing the gaps, the weak points, the blind spots. And now, with Gunnar leading the way, they moved like shadows, slipping past the perimeter guards unseen. A low whistle from Ethan signaled that the first phase was complete. They were inside. "Where do you think Greene is?" Ethan whispered. Andrew's jaw tightened. "Waiting for us." Because men like Greene didn't run. They made others do their fighting for them. A flicker of movement. Andrew reacted instinctively, pulling Ethan behind cover as a patrol passed just inches away. Gunnar barely made a sound as he crouched low, his keen eyes locked onto the target. Andrew signaled with 2 fingers. "Go!" Gunnar moved like lightning. A sharp rustle of movement, then a grunt of surprise as the guard was swiftly and silently neutralized. Ethan exhaled. "Remind me to never get on that dog's bad side." Andrew allowed a small smirk. "Took you this long to figure that out?" But they didn't have time to waste. Somewhere inside this estate, Greene was waiting. And this night wasn't ending until Andrew found him. The doors to Greene's private study swung open with an eerie silence. And there he was. Brian Greene stood near a towering window, his back to them, staring out at the city skyline as if he owned it. "You took longer than I expected," he mused. Andrew stepped forward, his stance unshaken. "I came to end this." Greene turned, amusement flickering in his sharp eyes. "End what, exactly? Justice has already been served, hasn't it?" Andrew clenched his fists. "Justice? That's what you call this?" Greene chuckled, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you? The system isn't broken, Andrew. It's just not built for people like you." A pause. Then Greene took a slow step forward. "You had your chance to walk away," he continued, "to take your daughter and disappear. But instead you came here. That tells me something." Andrew stayed silent. Greene smirked. "It tells me you're exactly like me." A deep breath. Then Andrew said, "No, that's where you're wrong." And that's when the lights cut out. Chaos erupted. The security alarms blared through the mansion, emergency lights flashing red as Andrew and Ethan moved fast. Greene's remaining guards stormed the room, but Gunnar was already in motion, knocking one aside, his powerful stance protecting Andrew's back. Ethan covered the door. Andrew focused on Greene. "Your empire is done," he said. "There's no escaping this." Greene's smirk faltered, just for a second, a flicker of doubt. Then, the sound of sirens. Andrew had already sent Ethan's earlier evidence to every major news outlet. The authorities were on their way. Greene was out of moves. For the first time, he had nowhere left to run. By morning, Greene's empire had fallen. Law enforcement arrived in waves, securing the mansion, arresting Greene's men, and taking their leader into custody. Across the city, the corruption within the NYPD unraveled, exposing a deep-rooted network of deceit and cover-ups. John Baker, Greene's most trusted enforcer, was arrested along with dozens of officers linked to the conspiracy. The system that had once betrayed Andrew was now forced to confront its own failures. And this time, the world was watching. The world finally knew the truth. By the time the sun rose over New York, Brian Greene's empire had crumbled. His arrest was plastered across every major news outlet, his crimes laid bare for the public to see. Fraud, conspiracy, murder, corruption at the highest levels. The once untouchable business mogul had fallen, taking John Baker and an entire network of dirty cops down with him. For Andrew Perez, the weight of injustice that had crushed him for months had finally lifted. But he wasn't thinking about Brian Greene. He wasn't thinking about the headlines, the news reports, or the citywide scandal that had shaken the NYPD to its core. He was thinking about Emily, because at the end of it all, she was the only thing that mattered. The day of Andrew's official exoneration, the courthouse was packed. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, eager to capture the moment New York's most infamous criminal cop walked free. Inside, Ethan Miller sat beside him, his expression unreadable. The man had risked his career, his life, and everything he had to prove Andrew's innocence. Now it was almost over. "Nervous?" Ethan asked. Andrew smirked, but there was something different in his eyes. "Not anymore." Then the judge entered, and the room fell silent. One by one, the charges against Andrew were dismissed. The evidence was irrefutable. He had been framed, the real criminals exposed, and the conspiracy dismantled. Then came the moment he had been waiting for. "Andrew Perez, you are officially exonerated of all charges. You are free to go." The gavel struck the bench. A deep, shuddering breath escaped him, not because he was relieved, because justice had been served. As soon as he stepped out of the courthouse, Emily was there. She didn't hesitate. She ran to him, full speed, her tiny arms reaching out. Andrew caught her, lifting her into his arms, holding her so tightly he could feel her heartbeat against his chest. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered into his neck. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I promised you, didn't I?" For months, he had endured pain, betrayal, and injustice. But this moment, this embrace, was worth everything. Because Emily was safe. Because they were together again. The corruption scandal ripped through the NYPD like wildfire. The public was outraged. Politicians scrambled. Officials resigned. Every officer involved in Greene's network was either fired, investigated, or already in handcuffs. Some tried to plead innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. Brian Greene himself had been denied bail, awaiting trial for a lifetime of crimes. John Baker, facing a future behind bars, the same prison he had once sentenced Andrew to. And the NYPD? It would never be the same again. For some, this was the end of a dark chapter. For Andrew, it was a beginning. 2 days later, Andrew stood on the beach, watching as Emily and Gunnar played in the waves. The salty breeze carried her laughter through the air, mingling with the rhythmic crash of the ocean. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden streaks across the ocean waves. Andrew Perez stood barefoot in the sand, watching as his daughter, Emily, ran along the shoreline, her laughter carried by the sea breeze. Beside her, Gunnar sprinted through the water, his paws kicking up sprays of foam as he stayed at her side, her protector, her guardian, her forever friend. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, there was peace. Not the fragile kind, the one that came with waiting, watching over your shoulder, preparing for the next fight. This was real. This was freedom. Not long ago, Andrew had been a man without options. He had been framed, imprisoned, and stripped of everything he thought made him who he was. But in losing everything, he found what truly mattered. Not the badge, not the career, not even the justice system he had once sworn to uphold. It was this, the sound of his daughter's laughter, the weight of her small hand in his, the presence of a dog who had never given up on him. It was family, and in the end, family was the only thing worth fighting for. So what now? The voice came from beside him, Ethan Miller, his closest friend, the man who had risked everything to help him clear his name. Andrew didn't answer right away, because for the first time in a long time, he didn't have a plan. He had spent months running, fighting, surviving. He had torn through corruption, uncovered the truth, and faced down the men who tried to take everything from him. But now he had the chance to choose his future. "I don't know," Andrew admitted, his gaze still fixed on Emily. Ethan smirked. "That's a first." Andrew chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, it is. And maybe that was okay. For years, his life had been dictated by duty, responsibility, and the weight of a badge. But the truth? He didn't need a badge to make a difference. He didn't need a courtroom to deliver justice. And he sure as hell didn't need the NYPD to stand for what was right. As if sensing Andrew's thoughts, Gunnar trotted over, shaking off the water before settling at his feet. He looked up, his eyes sharp, unwavering, loyal. "You know," Ethan said, nodding toward the dog, "I think he knew all along." Andrew ran a hand through Gunnar's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Gunnar had been with him from the start. He had fought beside him, saved his life, led him to Emily. He had done all of that not because he was trained to, but because he was family. "Yeah," Andrew said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I think he did. Because if there was one thing Gunnar had taught him, it was this. Loyalty isn't about duty, it's about love." The waves crashed, the scent of salt thick in the air. Emily turned toward him, her eyes bright, full of life. "Daddy, come play." For a moment, Andrew just stood there, taking it all in. This was what he had fought for. This was what he had almost lost. He wouldn't waste another second. With a grin, he kicked off his jacket and ran toward the waves, Gunnar barking excitedly as he chased after them. Because at the end of the day, titles, power, and status meant nothing. What mattered was love, loyalty, and the people, both human and canine, who stood by your side through it all. And as Andrew lifted his daughter into the air, as Gunnar circled them playfully, as the world finally felt right again, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, he would face it together with them. And that was all he needed. This story isn't just about clearing a name or seeking justice. It's about the unbreakable bonds that define us. It's about the power of love, loyalty, and resilience in the face of betrayal. Andrew Perez lost everything. His freedom, his career, his reputation. But through it all, he never lost sight of what truly mattered. His daughter, Emily. His journey wasn't just about proving his innocence. It was about proving that no force in the world could sever the connection between a father and his child. And then, there's Gunnar. More than just a trained K9, Gunnar symbolizes unwavering faith and devotion. In the darkest moments, when the world turned its back on Andrew, Gunnar never did. He wasn't bound by duty or obligation. He fought alongside Andrew because love is the most powerful force of all. The story also shines a light on the flaws in justice systems, where power and corruption can manipulate the truth. But it also reminds us that truth always has a way of surfacing, especially when there are people willing to fight for it. Ethan Miller's loyalty, Emma Williams' courage, and Hannah Reyes's determination all prove that even in a broken world, good people still exist. Ultimately, this isn't just a thriller. It's a testament to the strength of family, the importance of trust, and the belief that even when everything is taken away, as long as we have love, we have everything. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, so you never miss another incredible story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.